Hi everybody, welcome to this talk on data products and data monetization. I'm Bettina, I work at Springer Nature on data products. Most people outside R&D have usually not heard of Springer Nature. We create information and data products for scientists all over the world, and we make €1.5 billion revenue with that. Our data are being used by scientists. Material scientists are a good example. They use our data and access our data to create new high-performance materials. Life scientists use our data to create new cure against cancer or COVID-19. And governments and agencies such as the FDA use our data to track new drugs in the market for undesired side effects. This is what we do, creating data products to advance R&D. So why are data products important to you? Data products are still a relatively new concept. Usually data products refer to internal data products, internal analytics solutions that help people make smarter decisions based on internal data. However, what we see is that more and more companies want to access external data to keep that competitive edge and generate competitive insights into their markets, into their customers, into their product performance. This is where data products come into play because they allow one company to monetize its exhaust data in new ways, creating new revenue streams and helping a potential buyer, a potential user to supplement internal data sources with external ones. In the words of Accenture, internal company data is just not enough anymore to maintain a competitive edge. And it's external data sources that are increasingly being sourced in. So back to my group at Springer Nature, data products is what we do. We sit on this gold mine of data, and we have learned over the years how to turn the data into data products and data services, which users love and buyers buy. Our buyers and users are sometimes players we had never intended to sell to. They want to buy our data for use cases we had not anticipated. And sometimes, as you'll see later, they even buy data we had not intended to sell. So after some time, we had really figured that out in the field of data products and data services. And people started coming with questions, pressing questions such as, how do we know if we actually sit on a gold mine of data? How do you sell data? And very importantly, the third question, are we actually allowed to do that? So let's look at those three questions in more detail. We will look at each with a story. I will use stories of learning, sometimes painful learning, to illustrate the most important points when it comes to those three questions, to allow you and your organization to move faster and more painless than we have done over the years. So let's start with the first question. Do we sit on a gold mine of data? Let's start with a story from my business. So we were working with a big engineering company a couple of years ago. They showed a strong interest in material science and material science data. We showed them our most complex data sets, the kind of data sets that only people with a PhD can actually pronounce, yet alone understand and use. They were interested. They looked at the data, they were interested. We did a demo, but the sales process didn't really move along. It kind of felt stuck, demo after demo. We didn't really come to an agreement. And it turns out the company doesn't want our super complex data for data scientists. We were like, what? What they wanted was our underlying knowledge models, our data hierarchies, which we used in the background in our internal data production processes to structure, normalize, and enrich data in order to surface our data in the most useful way in our data products. So we had built those knowledge models over the years with lots of manual labor. And as I said, they were driving our internal production processes. And we had never intended to sell this data knowledge models because they were internal essential assets. What's the learning here from this story? The learning is that you need to be acutely aware of what data assets you actually have in its entirety and how to describe them in the best possible way. You want to catalog your data assets and describe them in as much detail as possible. That allows you to market your data better, and it will also help you to grasp their potential value early on. So let's look into this in a bit more detail. As I say, the journey to data monetization starts with data asset profiling. There are usually 8 objective dimensions or criteria that are being used to describe data. You can see them here on the screen, ranging from accuracy all the way to uniqueness. Most of them are self-explanatory, such as completeness. The question is, does your data set capture all instances, and does it then fill out each data field for all of those instances? Accessibility talks about formats and ease of integration and use. Data integrity talks about value adds such as structuring, normalization, enriching, and interlinking data. History and timeliness are of particular importance to the financial industry, who very regularly source external data as so-called alternative data to make smarter decisions. And they would usually require data to be available over multiple economic cycles and being assembled in a high frequent manner. And then you see precision and uniqueness speak for themselves. Next to those 8 objective criteria to describe data assets in your data catalog, it is important to be aware that there are a number of subjective factors. Those subjective factors drive value and relevance, and those depend on the use case, on the buyer, and their intention. These include perceived data scarcity from the perspective of the buyer, believability, objectivity, relevance, and many others. The upper part, the 8 objective criteria, you can describe on your own. The subjective parameters can only be worked out and assessed together with the potential user. We will see later when we talk about selling and pricing that those subjective parameters are extremely important to grasp in order to understand what's the potential value of your data and how strong is your position as a data seller. I talk about selling. Let's look into this. This is one of the many fears of product managers who look into external data products for the first time. Now, I have again a story for you, a story of a startup. A startup came to me and talked about data they had created and sourced and enriched and structured, which helped to look at innovation in an entirely new way. It felt it was sitting on a gold mine, because innovation drives research and development, and R&D ultimately drives money. So the startup felt very strongly about the data asset it had used resources and investment to create. It had worked hard on data creation till the money was spent, and then it turned to the market. The startup turned to the market with its great data product to find out that nobody wanted this data. The data didn't come from a trusted source. The data was nice to have, but not must have. The data was perceived incomplete. And potential buyers couldn't even look at the data because there was no money left to build a front end. Now, there are many lessons here. A lot on product development, certainly. But let's look at the lessons on commercialization and monetization. There are 3 elements to a successful commercial strategy around data products, which I want to quickly go into. The first is the element of go-to-market strategy. You need to think extremely hard about how will you take that data to market? What is the best way? The startup I just described couldn't go to the market on their own. They didn't have the right contacts. They didn't even know who to address. They didn't have brand and trust in an important area such research and development. They didn't have a way to showcase their data, which was extremely important for a successful sales process. So that startup had screwed up when it comes to go-to-market strategy and had not considered that while building the product and getting ready for commercialization. A second aspect to be acutely aware of is the concept of consultative selling. Consultative selling means you do not start by showing off what you have, even though you know that very well from your data cataloging and asset profiling. But you start off with trying to understand, what does your potential customer actually need? Why and for what? And only once you have understood that in detail, you map that to the offering you may potentially have. Each of these detailed conversations matters not only for getting to a deal, closing a deal, but also for grasping the potential value your data has to that potential buyer. At some point, you will need to be able to quote, need to be able to price, and that's very hard for a data product which you have never sold. Once you understand use case and value, you get closer to quoting a price that may work for both sides. When you do that, make sure to account for unforeseen expenses on your side, such as issues around data transfer, data integration, chaperoning, and other hand-holding needs on the buyer side when they then start using that data and hopefully making sense of it. The third element I want to highlight is that this is still a very immature area. Apart from the financial industry, who has been pretty advanced and sophisticated in that space, most other industries, verticals, and players are new to external data. They are new to licensing data in. So finding customers, finding use cases, and most importantly, finding budgets for data acquisition isn't easy and needs a lot of creativity and persistence, which some product managers have, others don't. Get a sales training. Don't be afraid to sell, and identify those people in your organization who may be more comfortable with this than others. Another interesting route to identify those potential buyers and those potential use cases are data marketplaces. They're coming up all over the place. One of them is Dawex in Europe. And what they say is that 70% of their transactions are cross-vertical. So through a data marketplace, you may, if you are lucky and you have described your data product in an attractive and useful manner, come across buyers and use cases in completely unrelated industries. Now that's nice because that doesn't put you in a position to debate whether you sell your data to a direct competitor, but to someone in an entirely new and different space. But it also makes it hard to understand how much will your data be worth to that potential buyer. And that's the point we discussed about consultative selling. So if you keep those three things in mind and discuss with your commercial teams and your commercial-minded product managers, and you are not afraid to sell, you are closer to turning your data assets into revenue. Turning back to that startup, what happened with it? I advise them ultimately to turn to a strategic partner who either distributes the data on their behalf or in fact licenses the data in and integrates into their own bigger, trusted and established product. The startup is at this point talking to potential partners, and I'm confident that this is the right route for them to go. Let's turn to the third and most feared question. And that's the question, are we actually allowed to do this? So here's a story of a head of data and analytics. I gave a talk at a product management conference recently, and afterwards, a head of data and analytics of a leading European insurer approached me. This person had many ideas for data products and data services. He had the data. He had commercially minded product managers, and he had the support of the sales organization. What he also had, however, was a very strong legal department, which was driven by concern, by worry, and by defensiveness. The head of analytics found it impossible to counter the many kill arguments brought forward by the legal department, and he couldn't progress the monetization ideas he had. So what are the lessons from this situation? Number one, get yourself a lawyer friend. You need to get knowledgeable in this field in order to demystify hesitations, foresee risks, and debate productively with your legal department. For people who do not have a law background, I recommend to look at 3 high-level questions to get started. The first is the question, do we have the right to sell? In order to get closer to an answer, a useful question is who and what helped to create the data in the first place. So it is sensible to draw a bit of a flow chart. How were those data created and what were different influx and input parties, parameters, sources that help to create those data? Do you have the rights to all those input sources? Makes it more likely that you have the right to sell the data. Second question is the question, is there privacy at stake? Of course, that's the big fear. I should say there are solutions for privacy related data. However, keep in mind that there's so much B2B data out there which goes beyond interactions with people. When privacy is at stake, familiarize yourself with consent and data anonymization functionality. There are plenty of solutions in the market, whether these are around grouping, noise, or other methods such as synthetic data. A topic takes extra care if privacy is at stake, but it's by no means an objection you can't get over. And the third is, what rights to grant is an important question which gives you a bit of flexibility to work around potential objections. So there are plenty of business models how to license data. What do you actually license? Do you license the data or just the results? Do you resell data or you allow use on that data? Do you do that once repeatedly? There are all those different flavors of data business models, data licensing models, and each of them have different legal conclusions. Some are more risky, others are less risky. So make yourself familiar with different data business models to be able to discuss strong and constructively if your legal department raises valid concerns. Back to our story. What happened to the head of data and analytics? I'm sad to say that he ended up changing the company because he felt he was not in the right ecosystem to enable the plans, the valid plans he had. So we have looked at 3 questions. Obviously, data is exploding. New revenue streams are always welcome. And the market for data is profoundly changing. We have looked at those 3 questions and we have covered a couple of key items when it comes to those. We discussed the concept of data assets and data profiling to really understand what is it that you have. And as I illustrated earlier, do not forget some of the data sources which you use for internal data production, which we did a couple of years ago. We talked about the question, how do you sell data successfully? How to commercialize successfully? And we discussed 3 concepts there. The concept of go-to-market strategy. Start thinking early, what is the best attempt, the best way to bring this data to the market? Do you partner with somebody? Look at a potential data ecosystem your data can fit into and understand which major players are active in that field who have advantages in terms of market access, knowing the right people, knowing the right budgets, having the right brand, trust, and just experience in the sales process of data assets. We discussed the concept of consultative selling and of value-based pricing. Do not show what you have, but understand what your buyer, what your user needs, how your data may help with that, and how that changes the picture on the buyer side, because that allows you very early on to grasp the value your data will have and to put an adequate price tag onto it. Not forgetting any potential costs, hand-holding, data transfer, etc. Make sure you put a buffer in your pricing for that, so you are not annoyed later. And then the third, we talked about customer discovery, the fact that this is still a relatively immature market, and there are new ways emerging how supply and demand are meeting each other. And I mentioned data marketplaces to you, which have a huge potential going forward. Finally, we looked at the data risk question, right? What would the legal department say? And we discussed three concepts. We talked about understanding data origin. Where does your data come from, and who and what has helped create those data in the first place? Or have you even licensed in data for which you then need to assure you have the proper rights to license that data further? We talked about data privacy solutions. There are solutions out there for privacy concerns, lots of them, in fact, very different approaches, but do not get blended by the fact that there are a lot of non-privacy, non-personal related data out there, which are very valuable for potential monetization cases. And then thirdly, I try to remind you of the variety in business models when it comes to data licensing out, which can help with some of the legal questions. Will this get big? You will probably ask yourself, is this worth the hassle? So let's look into one particular example Accenture has outlined here, and that is the space of IoT data marketplaces. So with the Internet of Things exploding, data marketplaces in that area are finding ways to match supply and demand. And they are saying that more than 1 million organizations will be monetizing their IoT data assets in 10 years from now. I hope with today's presentation, I was able to motivate you to look into your data assets, not only for internal data products, but also for external monetization. And I hope I was able to give you a couple of aspects you need to consider early on, next to building great products, thinking about how to commercialize great products along those three lead questions we looked at. I hope that was interesting. As you can tell, I'm quite passionate about that topic, and I would love to encourage you to get in touch in a follow-up session later today, over LinkedIn, over email. I would love to hear from you. Thank you very much.